This is the Dryfield of Balquhiderock, part of the area that the Scots would defend against English forces on the 23rd of June 1314, the first day of the Battle of Bannockburn. After the skirmishes of the first day, the Scots would make camp here that evening, before descending the wood to face the English on the morning of the 24th of June.
This behind me is Balquhiderock Wood, and I'm standing on part of what remains of the famous Dryfield here at Bannockburn. Now we're going to focus on another aspect of day one. This is the 23rd of June, the first day of the Battle of Bannockburn, which saw several skirmishes. Robert the Bruce's division has been away behind at Milton Ford, where he has been blocking the Falkirk to Stirling road. The road runs straight through towards the castle, passing St Ninian's. St Ninian's Church was there in 1242. Now, there are videos covering Robert the Bruce's skirmish at Milton Ford. What happened though? The Earl of Moray, Randolph, his objective was to block what is known as the Way. So he blocked part of the Dryfield here, and he also blocked the access to St Ninian's. Now Balquhiderock Wood here is dense nowadays. It would have been much more dense back in 1314, where the wood stretched right down onto the carse, and where modern day housing now stands. Randolph had quite a problem on day one, blocking the way, because it was so congested at Milton Ford. The retinue of knights, 300 of them. How do we know this? It's recorded in the Scala Chronica. 300 of them, under Robert Clifford and Henry de Beaumont. They made their way, having no access at all at Milton Ford. Gloucester's division was involved there. They made their way down towards the carse, keeping the open ground, went along the way, and Randolph's job was to block them. Now, Randolph had to split his force because the knights did not see them on the high ground. Henry de Beaumont and Robert Clifford went as far as Liveland's bogs, a treacherous bog which was impenetrable, and they had to make their way up the escarpment where Randolph had split his troops. He left them somewhere just up about here to block the way, and he took the rest of his force further up towards St Ninian's, where he would meet and engage with Beaumont and Clifford's men. This is the Pell stream, which flows all the way into the carse. Now, after Clifford and de Beaumont's retinue of 300 knights came to Liveland's bogs, which is about 700 yards long. It was a treacherous piece of ground back then, well before it was drained and built on. And the Pell stream would have been a lot more formidable back then. As you can see, this is quite densely wooded still. Anyway, they found a route up through the wood. But as you can see, the escarpment here, that's St Ninian's just ahead of me there, just beyond the road. But as you can see how steep this is. Heavy going for those nights. Heavy going in wet weather for those nights coming up this escarpment. But come up they did. And meanwhile, while they're making their way up through here, Thomas Randolph, somewhere away down that way, mid-Dryfield, is hurrying to cut them off. And de Beaumont and Clifford, when they got there, they waited on them and they beckoned them on. If today you come to Randolph Police Station, just beyond St Ninians, you will see these two stones. Now these stones were erected around 1340, 1350. Quite some time after 1314. I was out here, 2 years ago with William Scott, author of The Genius of Bannockburn, and Bannockburn Revealed. The stone we're approaching now is significantly larger. And traditionally, this has the association with the place where Randolph's schiltrums repelled Clifford and Beaumont's knights. 300 of them in number, remember. So when you consider that each knight horse armour and knight armour weighed a ton, the force of 300 knights, that's 300 tons, and the amount of pikemen it would take to withstand it. Now, several things happened during this skirmish. Because Randolph was blocking the way before St Ninians, and the English troops did not see him, they made their way up this area, he had to split his force in half. Now look at the distance between these two stones, and you just imagine this piece of ground lined out with the front line of pikemen. Now, to withstand a possible charge from 300 knights, this front line could have consisted of 160 men. Now, one knight would plough through 10 men easily. It took 15 men to a knight to at least absorb the impact, even if you killed the rider. 10 ranks deep, that's 160 men in a line, 10 ranks deep, would equal 1,600 men. That would be roughly half of Randolph's force. He's left the other half blocking the way, remember, further down beyond St Ninians. Now, one surprise happening during this charge. Because the Clifford and Beaumont did not see Randolph, Randolph has had to hightail it after splitting his force up to this area to block the knights coming up the escarpment. The knights found themselves on the verge of Livelin's Bog, which is way down below the escarpment over there, which we'll go and take a look at. So a good retinue of the knights got up here, but they heard and they saw Randolph's division rushing up here to cut off the way. Beaumont is recorded as saying, "Give them room, let them come on." One other certain knight in that payroll was Thomas Grey. This is Thomas Grey Senior, father of the Thomas Grey who penned the Scala Chronica. Thomas Grey replied when Beaumont said, "Give them room, let them come on." He says, "I fear they will have all the room they want too soon." He says, "Okay, if you're afraid, be off with you." Now, there's only one recorded death. One night, William Danecourt charged the Shiltram here, and he was put down. Thomas Gray's horse was killed under him, and he was dragged into the middle of the Shiltram and captured. He would not see action on day 2. His fight at Bannockburn was over here. The English did not charge en masse. They had some sport. What they decided to do, and frustratingly so, is they charged as individuals. And this is all recorded with Thomas Gray's testimony. And through frustration, they launched their weapons into the Scots, but Randolph's Shiltram held firm. Had they charged en masse, they would no doubt have demolished this. But it appears that they would have their sport. These stones would have been much larger, but souvenir hunters from the past have been chipping away at them. But when you see the distance here from this stone to that one, just to the right of the white car over there, this would have been the size, approximately 10 ranks deep, 160 men to a line, of Randolph's Shiltram. This is half his force on day 1. This is such a magnificent place. It's a place where people walk, people pass every day, and unless we really know about the significance of places in the past, it goes unnoticed. Today it's just a popular piece of open ground and a walkway. But after the drama of day 1 of the Battle of Bannockburn, this is where the Scots congregated. They congregated here because this is where they were going to make their move in the morning. This is where the army, under the divisions under the command of Robert the Bruce, James Douglas and Randolph, Earl of Moray, would silently make their way down through Balquhiderock Wood, just behind me there. But you can see them quiet under the still of night, no fires or anything like that, camping here in their thousands. As we shall see, there was a lot more than 6,000 Scots, or 5,000 or 6,000 Scots, as has been the thought to be number for many years. There were many more than that engaged in the battle. It was physically impossible to win the battle otherwise. But this would have been the camping area prior to the Scots making their battle moves to take the fight to the English on day 2. For me, Thomas Randolph perhaps had the most intense job on the first day's battles of Bannockburn. For the simple fact that he had to split his forces, and his objective of blocking one way suddenly became 2 ways, 2 areas that he had to block. And he was faced with a very formidable force of knights under the very experienced Henry de Beaumont and Robert Clifford. It's such a stroke of historic luck that Thomas Gray, his horse was killed underneath him and he was taken prisoner. And he wasn't killed that day. If he'd been killed that day, we would not have had the Scala Chronica Chronicle. And it's so revealing. And when I came here last, now these old stones here, I believe these were put here not long after Bannockburn, 40, 50 years or so, to commemorate Randolph, the Earl of Moray's stance here. And it makes sense. It's roughly about the size widthwise of what a sheltrum it would have been. Coming here in the company of author William Scott really opened up my mind and highlighted the areas. I have read his work over and over and over and over again, and I'm still reading it over and over again. But most of all, what he encouraged me to do is to come and walk the ground, to go and look, to see what is possible and what is not possible. Much of modern day one of Bannockburn, modern day, is much of it is built over. There are quite a few areas that are intact, and it would be fabulous to save them. But day 2 is largely intact, where the main mass battle took place. But coming here, walking the ground, walking down Clifford Road there, where you approach the escarpment beyond St Ninians, where it's so steep, you see the challenge that was in front of the retinue of knights just coming up there. But they did make their way. They beat Randolph to it, and they waited on him. They let him form up, and they challenged him. And I can just imagine when they all got down to the carse later that night, Gloucester would be reporting of his conflict with the Bruce at Milton Ford. Edward de Bruce holding the line between Halbert and Milton Bogs. He very likely saw action there as well as they tried to cross the Bannockburn. And Randolph here. So I'm sure Beaumont, Clifford and Gloucester had a few stories to share with King Edward. Robert Clifford would go on to perish the very next day in the battle. A man whose name appears frequently in Scottish history. Henry de Beaumont would be one of those knights who would lead King Edward II from the field, and they would be pursued by James the Black Douglas most of the way home while they were in Scotland. And Thomas Grey going on to be captured and to give us this precious account of his version of what happened at Bannockburn in day 1. It's been an absolute pleasure doing this part of the video. If you like it, please hit the like button, share it to someone who may be of interest, and please subscribe.